My name's Charlotte and I'll be talking to you today about Polyamory 101. So, first of all, what is polyamory? Well, polyamory is wrong. It should be multiamory or polyerosy. However, most people have a television at home, so I won't get too precious about the mixing of Greek and Latin roots. But in all seriousness, polyamory is a variety of ethical non-monogamy. So most people are familiar with non-ethical non-monogamy, aka cheating. However, ethical non-monogamy is quite a large umbrella, it's a wide church as it were, generally characterised into several sections as it were. So there's things like swinging, where there is a primary couple and then they may have sexual relationships outside of the primary couple, at parties usually. However, these tend not to be emotional relationships. Then there are things like open relationships, which can be used interchangeably with polyamory, especially by older people. The word polyamory was not coined until 1990 or so. Obviously anyone practicing polyamory before that point would have either described it as open relationships or free love, depending on their own particular bent. However, open relationships in their modern parlance describe a primary relationship in which the couple seek primarily sexual but maybe emotional relationships outside that relationship. So generally speaking, a primarily sexual relationship which may have emotional components like friends with benefits, that sort of a thing. And then finally, polyamory. So polyamory means literally many loves. So it's multiple emotional relationships which may or may not be sexual. So for example, there are plenty of asexual people who are polyamorous, because it works well for them. So now let's talk about the types of polyamory. So really there are as many types of polyamory as there are people who practice polyamory. Basically, as we all say, everyone's polyamory is their own, and obviously every relationship will be different. Indeed, every relationship between any two people will be different, regardless of how many of those relationships an individual person may have, because people are different, shockingly. I will discuss the types of polyamory from what I think of as the most like monogamy to the least like monogamy. So starting with the most like monogamy, let's talk about polyfidelity or polyfi. So polyfidelity is often described as monogamy plus plus, although some people who practice it get quite annoyed about it being described as monogamy, because they argue that they have done the work to break down the sort of mononormative gubbins that plagues our society. I am sure at some point I will get conned into doing a talk about toxic monogamy, so stay tuned for that. But basically, polyfidelity is where there are 3 or 4 people in a triad or a quad, usually. They may all have a relationship together, so it may be that A is dating B, B is dating C, and C is dating A. Or they may have what's called a hinge or a V relationship, where A is dating B and B is dating C, but C is not dating A. But regardless, that relationship is a closed relationship. They are not seeking any partners outside of that relationship. And so that's why it's sometimes described as monogamy plus plus, is because it's not an open relationship anymore. So now let's move on to hierarchical polyamory. I'm just going to put some quick asterisks on a few things to denote them as being controversial, and I will sort of vaguely sketch out for you why they're controversial, but I won't go into any detail because obviously that would be quite a long talk on its own. But I want to flag this to you because later on we're going to discuss polyamorous Facebook groups, and I don't want anyone to go from here onto there and get themselves into the middle of a massive flame war and not understand what the hell's gone wrong. So, hierarchical polyamory can be considered quite controversial from some people, because it can be considered unethical, depending on the way in which one goes about it. There is very much a discussion between prescriptive and descriptive hierarchy. Having said that, let's move on to the description of hierarchical polyamory. So in hierarchical polyamory, There is a primary couple or triad. They may live together, they may be married, they may have children together, but regardless, there is a primary couple. They have the most important and most committed relationship in the arrangement. Then they have slightly more casual relationships, which are called secondary relationships, and then they may have even more casual relationships, which are referred to as tertiary relationships. So the way I've always heard of how to categorise these is, if you get a brilliant job, but it's in, say, Glasgow, your primary says, well, when are we moving? Your secondary says, when can I visit you? And your tertiary says, well, it's been lovely knowing you. So that's basically the idea of hierarchical polyamory, and I hope you can see sort of the outline of why it might be considered controversial and possibly unethical. However, we will now delve deeper into this, because if you have ever seen any depictions of polyamory in the media, they have probably taken the form of what's called unicorn hunting. So unicorn hunting happens when a couple, generally speaking consisting of one heterosexual man and one bisexual woman, decide that either their relationship has grown stale or they're having some problems in that relationship, and the way they're going to fix this is they're going to introduce a hot bi babe, who will of course fall in love with them exactly equally and only have sex with both of them at once, but of course they can have sex together without her anytime they like, and will move in with them almost immediately and help look after their children and so on and so forth. Basically they'll usually have a whole long list of requirements that she must meet. Now the reason this is called unicorn hunting is that obviously it said mystical hot bi babe who's going to fall in love with both of you exactly at the same time is imaginary. That's not how it works. I'm not saying that triads, so that's a triad, occasionally rather tabloidly described as a throuple. I hate that word. Although one of my friends charmingly refers to them as triumvirates, which I quite like. But anyway, it's a relationship in which A is dating B, B is dating C, C is dating A. Now these are the most difficult of all polyamorous relationships, because there are 4 relationships in very close proximity that you have to maintain. The relationship of A to B, the relationship of B to C, and the relationship of C to A, and then the relationship of all 3 of you together. So, part of the reason that unicorn hunting gets such a bad rap is it tends to be the first thing that people want to do when they decide they're going to open up their relationship. They go, oh, we'll get a girlfriend for us to share, this will be far easier. And it's not. So things go terribly wrong, and then, you know, there's chaos and disaster and cat kidnappings and all sorts. Unicorn hunting is somewhat inherently unethical because the couple have not taken time to break down what's called their couple's privilege. So this is both an intra-relationship thing and a larger societal thing. So in the intra-relationship thing, this couple, if they are married and if they have a house together and so on and so forth, and then the unicorn moves in with them, and then a few months down the line they have problems because they have failed to break down their relationship and to create a new relationship with this person. So this person, rather than being in a relationship with A and B, is in a relationship with the relationship between A and B, which is not a good situation. But regardless, this poor woman, when they have problems and decide that they are through with her and kick her out, is now out of a house and out of a home, and this couple still have each other and their marriage and their home. But it's also a societal issue in that our society is set up to privilege couples, particularly heterosexual couples, or at least couples that appear heterosexual, particularly couples that are married, particularly couples that have children or are otherwise, you know, fulfilling their biological imperative to raise the next generation. And so this can also have effects on a relationship. Like, I don't know if you've ever tried to book a hotel room for 3 adults, but it is very hard, especially if no one's going to sleep on the terrible, terrible cot of doom, where, you know, every time you roll over it makes a hideous shrieking sound like the tormented souls in hell. So this is one of the major problems that is inherent in unicorn hunting, is that people don't deal with their couple's privilege, and this is what makes it unethical, and this is part of the reason why polyamorous people, particularly experienced polyamorous people who know how difficult triads are and know that the best way to have them is to start dating separately and see how you go, have problems with them. So I hope that has explained that as fully as possible. So now we'll move on from hierarchical polyamory to egalitarian polyamory. So egalitarian polyamory is sort of an opposite ideal to hierarchical polyamory. Also, these types of polyamory, several of them can be practiced at the same time. So one can be practice egalitarian polyamory and solo poly, which I will come on to, and relationship anarchy at the same time. They can all be in the same relationship. Similarly, one could practice hierarchical polyamory and, to a certain extent, solo polyamory, although probably not relationship anarchy for reasons that should become apparent. But anyway, in egalitarian polyamory, the idea is that you treat all of your partners as equally as possible. This does not mean that you spend the exact same amount of time with them and the exact same amount of sort of investment in each relationship. It merely means that you have made the dedicated choice that nobody's wants are going to come above anyone else's needs, and you're going to try and give everyone what they need from the relationship. So there are people who are egalitarian poly, who are married and who have children, and who may have certain obligations which will obviously take precedent in a relationship, because these are needs in a relationship, over certain other over certain other wants of people. But overall, nobody's wants come above anyone else's needs. I hope that makes sense. So next we're going to talk about solo polyamory. So solo polyamory is the idea of stepping off the relationship escalator. Now there is a book dedicated to this, which is called, shockingly enough, Stepping Off the Relationship Escalator by Amy Gahan. I am really sorry if that is not how her name is pronounced. Anyway, most, in fact all polyamorous people have stepped off the relationship escalator, as one of these steps is monogamy. However, the relationship escalator in its most basic form is the way that relationships are portrayed in movies. So it's, you know, boy meets girl, or girl meets girl, or non-binary people have their meet cute, whichever genders or lack thereof is involved. Anyway, two people meet, they exchange numbers, they go on some dates, they kiss, they have sex, they move in together, they get engaged, they get married, they have 2.5 kids and a house and a pickup truck and a picket fence, and I think this isn't, and a dog, and now this is a country song. So yeah, so solo poly people are people who value their independence and feel that it's unnecessary in a relationship to have this continual merging of lives and continual merging of personhood. So solo poly people tend not to live with their romantic partners. Goodness only knows, I certainly can't live with my romantic partners. I just cannot cope with being that angry at someone I love for not taking the bins out. They may or may not be married, but if they are married, they may not live with their romantic partners. I certainly know plenty of people who are married to someone they don't even live on the same side of a continent as. They may have children, or they may not. It's certainly more common for solo poly people to be child-free. But if they do have children, they may not necessarily live with their co-parent, or if they do live with their co-parent, they may not be in a romantic relationship with them. And also, sort of, it's just a general dedication to one's independent life and uncoupling of the idea of commitment and like merging into one person with one life. So now let's move on to relationship anarchy. So relationship anarchy is possibly questionably in the polyamory overview. It certainly is usually a type of ethical non-monogamy and it fits relatively well within polyamory. However, there are some monogamous people who are relationship anarchists. I am not entirely sure how they manage this, but hey, go them. So relationship anarchy is kind of what it says on the tin. It's the idea that you want to let go of labels in your relationships. So really hardcore relationship anarchists will not label their relationships at all, or will just give each individual relationship its own label that has sort of no particular bearing on anything. Whereas some relationship anarchists will label their relationships, but they will label them in a descriptive rather than a prescriptive way. So this, for example, so the sort of shape this takes is, rather than saying that you're dating and then acting accordingly, it is acting as if you're dating, then deciding that you're going to call what you're doing dating. And this is why it took me 5 months to work out I was dating my girlfriend. It was a political statement and totally not lesbian cluelessness. And I'm sticking to that story. But yes, it's all about sort of getting rid of the weird definitions we have between this is my friend who I'm very emotionally close to, and this is my friends with benefits who I'm incredibly emotionally close to and have sex with, and this is my partner who I'm incredibly emotionally close to and have sex with. This is a very, very different relationship to my friends with benefits. It's more about letting each relationship develop as it would, without putting a stricture on it. So now let's move to relationships between your metamors. So, quick glossary lesson. The person you're dating is your paramour. The person they're dating, assuming you're not dating them, is your metamor. And the person they're dating, assuming you're not dating them, is your meta-metamor or your orthomor. And then your larger sort of extended poly network, as it were, is your polycule. Because if you drew it all out in a little relationship map, it tends to look like quite a large, bizarre polymer molecule. And occasionally it does require some 3D thinking. Anyway, so types of relationships. Parallel poly. This is where your partners know about each other, but they do not talk to each other, they do not interact. They are two parallel lines that never touch, and you just intersect with them at some point. Now, the most extreme form of this is questionably polyamory, basically because there are some ethical issues with this, and so it tends to get put in a bit of a box on its own, and that is don't ask, don't tell. So don't ask, don't tell is where one partner has gone to the other partner and said, I don't care what you do outside the relationship, go, you can have other sexual partners, you can have other emotional relationships, you can fall in love with whoever you want, I never want to hear about it. It's effectively cheating with permission. And so it can be quite questionably ethical, just because you then can't contact your metamor and make sure that they know that you're dating their husband or wife or partner or whatever. So this is why it tends to get boxed up on its own and sort of put in a corner. But anyway, that's parallel poly. Then there is kitchen table poly. So kitchen table poly is where your metamors are much more comfortable with each other. They probably contact each other, maybe even outside of the context of you. They could pass the Bechdel test, and just generally your whole polycule may have a much more open and communicative element. And maybe you even have some group activity. So for example, a section of my polycule go on holiday together, and we are having polycule movie nights where we all watch a streaming service together. So, you know, you might have something like that. Then there is family style poly. So family style poly is like the next step up. It's where you all live together in the same house. Now this is obviously only really suitable for people who have very small polycules, generally speaking people who practice polyfidelity. Because once you have open polyamorous relationships, unlike what you've seen in the media, stuff gets big and complicated very quickly. So for example, my extended polycule is around 150 people on 3 continents. It is obviously vastly impractical for us to all live together. It's hard enough to get us all together to go on holiday. And that was only 16 of us. Cool. So that's all of the relationship styles. Moving on. Now that you've thought about maybe what sort of relationship you'd like, how do you meet poly people? There are a few ways of doing this. Some in real life. So for IRL, maybe see if there is a local polyamory meetup. If you are in a largish city, there should be, at least in the UK, there are plenty in London. I know this because I run most of them. There are also in places like Manchester and Bristol. If you're in the US, Seattle has quite a thriving poly scene, although I'm not entirely sure what the meetups are like. I hear things. I've never actually been to Seattle. So, anyway, you can meet poly people in real life at your local polyamory meetup. Or there are various polyamory conferences. I am part of the committee that runs one of the largest one-day polyamory conferences in Europe, Polyday. I am sure we have put the website down there, just so that you can find our things. Shameless self-promotion spot. But also, there are several activities which have large overlaps with the polyamory community. So if you are a member of these communities and you are out as being a polyamorous person, there is a good chance you will meet ethically non-monogamous people. So for example, poly and geeky, that is a big overlap, particularly in things like role-playing. So I am given to understand there are up to 3 monogamous LARPers, because I know a lot of LARPers and I don't know any monogamous ones personally. So if you're into LARPing and you are open about the fact you're poly, you will probably meet loads and loads and loads of people who are ethically non-monogamous. Also tabletop role-playing. Maybe check out your local Monster Hearts campaign. see how things go. But yes, and there's various other geeky things, but role-playing tends to be the big one. I think it's because you obviously role-play other relationships. So the other big overlap is with the kink community. Obviously some of it is extremely monogamous, like people literally own other people, so that's obviously a very monogamous thing. But there is also a big overlap with the polyamory community. There are several other community overlaps. Basically, anytime you have stepped outside of the mainstream in one aspect of your life, you're much more likely to step outside of it in other aspects of your life. For example, in your relationship styles. So, things like the goth community, pagans, orgasmic meditation and tantra for relatively obvious reasons, LGBTQ community, like a lot of those communities have a lot of ethically non-monogamous people in them. So there's that for meeting in real life. Then there is online. So of course there are specific dating things. So online dating is hell. OkCupid, of the traditional ones, is probably your best of a bad bunch, that has been slowly going downhill since it got taken over by Match.com because they want to make you pay for the premium version. Then there is, of the swipey-swipies, Tinder is not horrendous, but I would strongly suggest putting the fact that you're poly in your bio and trying to make sure people have read your bio. Then I also hear good things about Bumble and Hinge. I'm sorry, I am an old lady and I have largely dated by working out. I am dating my friends 5 months after we started dating, so possibly not the best person to give advice here. And then for meeting poly people online, there are the aforementioned poly Facebook groups. There are hundreds of them, like so many. Just type poly into the Facebook search bar and see what you get back. There are general discussion groups, there are specialist interest groups, there are some incredibly niche groups that are like poly geeky European martial arts groups, or whatever. Like some of it is very niche, some of it's quite broad church. Just have a look around and see what you like. So just a word of warning though, Facebook groups come in 3 flavours of secrecy, depending on how out you are to your family. So there are open groups where everyone can see you're in the group, everyone can see everything you write in the group, everything is completely open. There are closed or private groups where people can see you're in the group, but no one can see what you write in the group, and also the group will probably be recommended to your friends. And then there are secret groups, which are secret. They don't come up in your search results, you have to be invited to them directly by one of your friends who is already a member, or by one of the mods has to send you a special link, although I think they might have taken that functionality away. But anyway, so if you are not out to your family, it might be worth thinking about having 2 Facebook profiles if you want to keep in touch with the polyamory community via the medium of Facebook. So, you know, have one Facebook profile to keep up with your Auntie Anne and one to keep up with all your poly friends. Do make sure you are signed into the correct profile before you post about your shiny new butt plug. I do know someone who made that mistake. Fortunately, they were able to delete it quite quickly. Now, also, that you may just meet people in the wild. You may just meet someone randomly at a bar and think they're wonderful. Now, a lot of the questions that you get asked as a polyamory educator is, when should I tell someone I'm poly? And the answer is, as soon as possible, but I would say definitely before the first date. Because if polyamory is a deal breaker for them, and you get to the first date, then they have put in all the effort of getting dressed up nice and getting to the place you're having a date, and then they're going to be vastly disappointed and probably storm out. So, I mean, I'm just generally also pro working out what your deal breakers are before your first date and discussing them with whoever you're doing dating. Anyway, so now on to the now that you've worked out what sort of polyamory you might want to practice, and also where you might meet people to practice your polyamory with, let's talk about some of the issues with polyamory and the things you've got to think about. So, first of all, let's talk about possibly the third thing that people always ask me when they find out I'm polyamorous, which is, don't you get jealous? And the answer is yes, of course, because, you know, I am a human being and jealousy is a normal human emotion. The ways in which we talk about jealousy and deal with jealousy in our society are pretty abnormal and I would say fairly unhealthy. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a lightning quick, extremely textbook sort of example of how to deal with jealousy, and then I will link some extra resources down in the doobly-doo. So, or possibly to the side in the doobly-doo, depending on what platform this is on. Anyway, so jealousy. Now, the first thing about jealousy is there are 2 types of jealousy, and our society is really shit at working out which type is which. So there is envious jealousy, aka envy, which tends to be things like, my partner has gone to have a lovely picnic with their girlfriend. I wish I was also at the picnic. And then there is possessive jealousy, which is more what I'd characterise as, get your hands off of them, you bitch, or I'll scratch your eyes out. So the way in which one deals with jealousy. So jealousy is, to a certain extent, an inevitable part of the human condition. However, there are ways of dealing with it. It's the emotion is not the problem, it's how you go about it. So for jealousy, the first thing you want to do is work out why you're jealous. Now, a certain amount is inevitable, however, jealousy tends to flag up that either you are insecure in your relationship or you have some needs that are not getting met, or possibly both. So in my extremely textbook example, I'm going to say my partner flirts with other people in front of me and that makes me jealous. So the first thing you're going to want to do is work out why that makes you jealous. So for example, do they not flirt with you as well and therefore you feel less desired than the people they're flirting with? And if that's it, and you took that down as thought about it, then you have to communicate this to your partner and come to some sort of compromise. compromises in polyamory do tend to look a little different to compromises in monogamy. So in monogamy, the compromise for I feel jealous when my partner flirts with other people in front of me would be, partner, you are never allowed to flirt with people ever again. However, in polyamory it might look more like, I feel jealous when you flirt with the other people in front of me because you don't flirt with me anymore and it makes me feel less desired. Please could you make an effort to flirt with me as well? So, hopefully once that's been put into place, some of the jealousy will be assuaged. Yes, I am aware that was an extremely simple and textbook example. Anyway, there is also the opposite of jealousy, compersion. So this is defined as happiness in another's happiness, even if it's to your detriment. So, for example, a lot of people experience this outside of romantic relationships. If your work bestie gets an amazing new job at another company, you are going to be incredibly happy for them, even though it means that your work days are now going to be much, much sadder because they're not going to be around anymore to cheer you up or bitch about how creepy Jeff is in the kitchen with you. And the same goes with your partners. You might be very, very happy that your partner is happy with your another partner, even though it means that they maybe have a bit less time for you. So speaking of that, let's move on to the next issue, which is NRE, or New Relationship Energy, aka your brain on drugs. I'm not actually joking as much as I'd like to be there. So new relationship energy is basically, you know when you start a new relationship, or maybe you don't, maybe you're not one of the people who don't experience this, but generally speaking, when you start a new relationship and you are obsessed with the person, you can't get enough of them and you think about them every second you're away. This is because your body, your brain is dumping enormous amounts of things like serotonin and dopamine into your into your brain, and it's basically like having a small opioid addiction. So obviously you don't tend to think particularly straight. So in monogamous relationships, this tends not to be quite so much of a problem because you're only doing this in one relationship at a time. However, if you're doing this in non-monogamous relationships, you may have an established relationship or several established relationships that you wish to nurture whilst you also have this incredible obsessive NRE happening. So there are two halves to this. One, as a person experiencing NRE, you have to remember to maintain your existing relationships. NRE does not last forever. Generally speaking, it peters out around about the 6 month mark, depending on how often you see each other. Equally, if you are someone in an existing relationship, you may have to be extra forgiving of the person who's in a new relationship, and also possibly take some extra steps to remind them that you exist and you're in a relationship with them, because they are not thinking straight. And now on to practical issues. So you have lovely multiple people, you've dealt with your emotional issues, now for practical issues. Love is infinite, but sadly time is not. So let's move on to the tricky subject of scheduling. So how do poly people deal with scheduling? Google Calendar. I don't know if everyone saw the memes when Google Calendar went down about there are so many polyamorous people who should be sleeping with someone tonight and they have no idea who. But that's basically true. A lot of polyamorous people do run their life of Google Calendar because you can share calendars with each other and it makes it much, much easier to see when you have a mutual free life. This is especially brilliant where I'm not sure if it's just because busy people are much more likely to be polyamorous or what, but most poly people I know, as well as having multiple relationships, also have like multiple hobbies and are on a committee and I know have pets to care for and all that. And so we tend to be quite busy and finding some free time together is quite important. Also, if someone is very spectacularly disorganised, you can have right privileges in their calendar. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for romantic relationships, but I do personally have right privileges in one of my friend's calendars because she would agree to come to stuff and then not turn up. So now I have the ability to go into her calendar and write it in her calendar and make her phone remind her the day before and 3 hours before, so she turns up to the thing she agreed to come to. Apparently you can also do this with iCal, but then you can only date Apple users, so I don't know whether or not you want to make being an Apple user a deal breaker for you, so I will leave that up to you. The other issue is one that comes up reasonably frequently, which is the importance of sexual health and sexual safety with respect to STIs. Now, ethically non-monogamous people actually have one of the lowest rates of STIs, along with sex workers. This is generally speaking because both groups know that what they're doing is comparatively risky and therefore tend to take appropriate precautions both in terms of protection and testing, unlike monogamous people who tend to have multiple unprotected partners in a row and occasionally alongside each other, and then probably don't bother getting tested as often as they should because they only think about the fact they're sleeping with one person at a time. This is a vast generalisation. I'm sure there are very, very responsible monogamous people who are absolutely religious about their testing and their barrier use. But anyway, so there is a very important concept in this, which is fluid bonding. So fluid bonding is basically where people have decided they're going to dispense with barrier protection and allow their sexual fluids to mingle. I'm really sorry, I can't think of a less creepy way to put that, so just roll with it for now. But anyway, if you have not agreed to mingle your sexual fluids, I'm now going to share with you a brief overview of safer sex methods, because I am fully aware that most people's sex education was trash. I do, however, encourage you to go away and do your own research and your own risk assessment so that you can have proper, sensible negotiations and conversations about this, because obviously different activities have very different risk factors for STI transmission. So let's start off with the basics. Condoms. Most people are familiar with condoms. Hopefully. I know everyone's education was woeful, but even my stepmother managed to find out about condoms, and she was educated by nuns. But anyway, condoms. They are generally accepted for use for penis and vagina and penis and anus sex. All well and good. I would also encourage you to think about lube. Lubricant is important not only for improving sexual pleasure, but it also quite dramatically drops your rate of STI transmission even if you're not using a barrier, because it helps cut down on micro-tearing, which is basically where you kind of get an internal friction burn and you get tiny tears in your mucous membranes, which obviously is really bad if there is an STI to be transmitted there. So condoms should not only be used for penis and vagina and penis and anus sex, they should also be used for fellatio. That's why they make flavoured condoms. The banana and chocolate ones are disgusting, and I will give you a word of caution if you use the mint ones, because they are flavoured with real menthol usually, and that can react quite badly with your mucous membranes, so that's a very personal decision as to whether you are on board with mint flavoured things or not. Horses for courses. Also, whilst we are talking about oral sex, let's move on to dental dams. So dental dams are a sort of square of either latex or non-latex material. I personally prefer the non-latex ones, but sadly Passante has stopped manufacturing them due to some issues with licensing. So I think most people now are stuck with the latex ones, which do have the problem of A, they are made of latex, and so if you have a latex allergy, that is not good. And 2, because they're made of latex, they have to be flavoured, so you're back to the problem of the banana and chocolate ones are disgusting, and the mint ones react with your mucous membranes, which is much more of a problem for cunnilingus and analingus than it is for fellatio. Largely because there is a much larger mucous membrane contact area, particularly for cunnilingus, like your whole vulva is going to be a mucous membrane, pretty much. So, if you don't want to use those, you can also use cling film, non-microwave cling film, solid cling film, but the problem with cling film is it tends to bunch up into crevices, which can be a little uncomfortable. But also, some top tips for dental dam usage. Do make sure that you mark one side of it. If you're using an actual dental dam, they are slightly stretchy, which means they do occasionally ping off into the corner of the room, and you will want to know which way round and which way up they go. Also, to improve sensation, you can try a bit of lube on the opposite side from where your tongue's going to try and improve sensation transfer. Also, I'm just going to say that if you are going to practice analingus, I would strongly recommend using a dental dam or other barrier, even if you are fluid bonded, just because the feco-oral route is really, really popular for disease transmission, and you probably should make it longer than 0.5 of a millimetre. And finally, let us move on to the last barrier. So digital penetration. A lot of people have small cuts on their hands, or maybe like me, your cuticles are trash. But anyway, there tend to be a lot of cuts on your hand and also a lot of rough spots, especially if you use your hands a lot. Now, you can find out about these by smoothing hand sanitizer over your hands and seeing where it stings, or you can just wear gloves. So I am personally pro glove wearing. This is an occasion where gloves are appropriate. I personally recommend the nitrile ones. They are relatively affordable and they come in a delightful range of colours. They come in turquoise, blue, lilac and sexy metallic black. So that's all of our barriers. As I said, do feel free to go do your own research and have your own discussions about risk management and so on and so forth. Now let's move on to testing. So if the accent hasn't clued you off, I'm British, so this is the NHS recommendation. Please do look up your local health authority's recommendations. So the NHS at the moment recommends that if you are exposed to any bodily fluids ever, so pretty much everyone, you should have at least once every 12 months a full STI test, including blood draw for HIV and syphilis. If you are in a slightly higher risk category, for example, you have multiple established partners or multiple protected partners, then you have a STI test every 6 months. And if you are in a high risk category, for example, you have multiple novel partners, you have multiple unprotected partners, you participate in needle play, you are a sex worker. As you can see, high risk category covers a lot of ground. You should have a full STI test every 3 months. Now, generally speaking, the most convenient way of doing this, at least in the UK, if your local authority offers it, is the postal tests. There are a lot of questions about the efficacy of the postal tests. Once again, please do your own research. But also, we've had a decade of austerity, so basically all of the sexual health clinics have closed down, especially if you're over the age of 25, because as we all know, everyone stops having sex at the age of 25. Okay, so this has been the embarrassing sexual health talk. Moving on. So these are my, rules for poly, but A, they're more like what I'd call guidelines, and B, they actually apply pretty well to the rest of life as well. So, rule number 1, communication, communication, communication. You will hear this a lot from everywhere, because this is the thing that all relationships are based on, is good communication. So, this does not necessarily have to be verbal, talky communication. It can also be written communication. There are many people who do favour written communication in their relationships, particularly if it's a very emotional subject, largely because this just gives you a bit more time to, think about it and have your feelings and then respond rather than being pressured for an immediate response, and it also lets you edit your response. And it removes things like tone of voice and facial expression, which some people find immensely helpful, but personally I'm autistic so I can do the basic ones, but like if you're having a complicated facial expression I will have to stop and go, I'm really sorry, I can tell that your face is trying to tell me something, but I don't know what your face is trying to tell me, so please tell me in words. Which is not the best thing to happen in the middle of an emotional like conversation. So text isn't frequently appreciated. There is also the concept of the 5 love languages. These were developed by Dr. Gary Chapman. He has a book about it. In fact, he has several books about it. I will give you the contact warning if you wish to read these books, that there is a lot of heteronormativity and Jesus. Even in the second copy, even in the second edition, which apparently has far less Jesus, there is still a lot of heteronormativity and Jesus. But anyway, basically the idea of the 5 love languages is we all have different love languages, which are the ways we express and feel loved. And you will have a primary or some primary love languages and some that are less important to you, but the idea is you can't really feel loved unless all of these sort of tanks are topped up, and everyone has different levels and everyone has different dialects. So the 5 love languages are words of affirmation, which, like I said, they're a dialect, so it may be, the words of affirmation may be I love you, they may be you're awesome baby, go kick ass, and they may be you look amazingly sexy today. But words of affirmation, there is also physical touch, so kissing, hugging, massages, sex, cuddles, forehead kisses. Forehead kisses are an excellent way of showing you love someone. Then there is quality time spent together. So that's time concentrating on each other and really feeling each other, not time you're just merely spending in each other's company. So time you're spending in each other's company comes under the next one, which is gifts. So the love language is gifts. It's not necessarily expensive. It's not even necessarily a physical item. So yes, the love languages of gifts may be I was in the supermarket and they had your very favourite ice cream flavour, so I bought you a tub of ice cream. Or it might be, I'm going to spend a lot of time in your company, I'm giving you the gift of myself. Or, we have done a lot of research on this and we have decided that the giving of memes is the love language of gifts. Because it means that you have been thinking about the person while you weren't with them, and you have given them a thing that you think will make them happy because you were thinking about them while you weren't with them. And then finally, there is acts of service. So acts of service is not like doing the washing up when you live with someone. Acts of service is something you go out of your way to do for them. So for example, there is someone I know who, his now wife, when they first got together, detailed his car for him, so like washed it inside and like washed all the outside and waxed it and hoovered the inside and like scrubbed bits of it and polished everything. And that is an act of service. That is a thing that you have done so the other person doesn't have to, that is well outside your scope of normal duties. So, love languages. Now for point 2. Don't be a dick. I did say that these were suitable for everyday life. So don't be a dick. Not only don't deliberately hurt people, but deliberately try not to hurt people. And so this comes in with 2A, which is own your shit. I am personally with Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. So the better you know yourself, and the better you know how you handle things, and the better you can handle things because you know more about yourself, the better you are to be around, and the better you will be with other people, because not only the better you have handled yourself, but the better you can communicate how to handle you. So now on to point 3. Now point 3 is basically the reverse of point 2. It's don't drive more car than you can handle. So if there is someone who you think will hurt you, or you think might mess you up, don't date them. Possibly don't have sex with them. Maybe don't even be friends with them. Maybe just have them as a comment. So a comment is someone who's really awesome but only comes into your life every so often. They just kind of hurtle through, a bit like the Hallibop, only obviously, hopefully, a bit more frequently than once every 76 years. So, for example, I am a horrifically blunt person because I do not do subtext without like a good couple of hours warning and a primer. So if you are a very sensitive person who reads a lot of subtext into things, probably don't date me, because I will at some point say something horrific that I totally have not meant like that and not thought that it could be taken like that. So that sort of thing is, no matter how tempting, don't get involved with people who will hurt you, because they will hurt you. So, that was Polyamory 101. There may be further projects, but I'm not promising anything, and I hope